Hi, folks. Can you hear me all right? Awesome. Thank you. Hi. Thanks so much for joining us here at Green Apple Books on the Park, celebrating Obi Kaufmann's Coast of California. Let's make some noise for Obi. So we're really excited to have Obi here at Green Apple. We've had the privilege of hosting him here before. He's a champion of independent bookstores, and so we're really grateful to have him here and be a part of this tour for his most recent, most excellent book. Little bit of business before we get to the main event. I just wanted to say thank you for keeping your masks on between sips, trying to move forward as safer as we can, still be celebratory, and transmission is just really high in San Francisco right now. So thank you for being cool about it. And thank you to everyone that's joining us online from wherever you are joining us from. We would love to know where you're joining us from. So don't be shy, enter it into the chat. We would love to know. Other brief business, please do check out our event calendar. I'm a little biased, but it's pretty great. It's on our website at greenapplebooks.com/events. So if you enjoy events such as these, you might be interested in other ones that we have coming up. That being said, please do buy books if you are able. I can think of a few books that you might want to purchase this evening, or at least one of them if you have the whole Field Atlas collection already. But if you've been here before, you've heard me say that when you buy books, you not only support us as a store in putting on events such as these, but you also support the writers who put so much time and work into making these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, please do consider buying books from us, Green Apple. How many times can I say our bookstore name in the introduction? So before we move forward, I wanted to honor the fact that this is a difficult week to be living in this country. Among many difficult weeks to be living in this country, I know that there are a lot of places that you could be right now, and I so appreciate you being here with us and coming out and joining us. I think it's very easy to question the frivolity of going out to literary events or finding any kind of enjoyment when you're facing like violence, avoidable violence, and like looking at another avoidable national tragedy. And I really hate how many times I've had to preface readings like this, especially over the past 2 years. But I also really do believe to my very core that writing and art and books are anything but frivolous. And I think especially writing like this evening about conservation and how beautiful our natural world is anything but frivolous. And I think that being here together matters, even when our hearts are bleeding for many things. And community like this is anything but frivolous. So that being said, it would feel inappropriate to not acknowledge that the world is really bad in very many ways, but I'm really glad to be here with you folks. And so tonight we're gonna enjoy Obi's work, this really beautiful thing, and we're gonna celebrate together, and I really appreciate you being here with us. So very brief run of show. Obi's gonna speak and do a presentation, and he's going to answer some audience questions. Yes. Going to answer some audience questions. And we'll also have a signing line afterwards at the back desk where my colleague Jake checked you in. There she is. And all of these books are pre-signed. Obi was gracious enough to sign all of our stock for this event. So if you want to come up and say hi and get a personalization, that's what the signing line is for. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our naturalist and writer and illustrator for this evening. Growing up in the East Bay as the son of an astrophysicist and a psychologist, Obi Kaufmann spent most of his high school practicing calculus and breaking away on weekends to scramble around Mount Diablo, map its creeks, oak forests, and sage mazes. Into adulthood, he would regularly journey into the mountains, spending more summer nights without a roof than with one. He is the author of California Field Atlas, which is a #1 San Francisco Chronicle bestseller. The State of Water, Understanding California's Most Precious Natural Resource, and The Forests of California, a California Field Atlas, all published by Heyday Books, which is wonderful, wonderful publisher. When he's not backpacking, you can find the painter poet at home in the East Bay, posting trail paintings at his handle at Coyote Thunder on Instagram. His website is coyotethunder.com. His book, The Coasts of California, is the reason we are here tonight. So please join me in welcoming Obi Kaufmann. You don't need to. Okay. Yes, but everyone else does.
All right. You guys mind? I'm all vaccinated. Good. Okay. Good. Okay. I can breathe and sing. Not really. Don't worry. Hey, thank you. Thank you all for coming here. What a pleasure it is. Thank you, Carr. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Green Apple, for having me. Reveling in a new era of togetherness despite the woe. And tonight we're joined by Emmerich Anklem. Round of applause for my editor is here tonight from Heyday Books. Yes, we just had a frenetic cup of coffee discussing what we're doing next, the deserts of California, the next field atlas that will complete the lands trilogy that is the forests of California, the coasts of California, which we're here tonight celebrating, and then the deserts of California. Fall 2023, God willing. So it is a pleasure to be with you here tonight on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land, as it is Mukwama nation that still goes unrecognized by the federal powers that be, despite 17 years of petition. I'm going to follow that up with, if you will indulge me, a thought I had yesterday that demands to be voiced a little bit outside the context of my normal vocation. Nonetheless, the gun in question explodes in a flower of death because that is its only function. The gun in question is pure like that. Such a device, a thing that can only ever exist inside a realm of zero space violence, unmediated and supreme, works only to shatter not only the bodies it disintegrates, but also inevitably will break the mind of the one who attempts to wield it, regardless of background check. From there, the shots of the gun in question echo, and expanding sound alters and perverts any bit of vision we hold towards holism. At the murder scene in every town you know, each and every red mote with the constellation of spit blood against the wall becomes a different ideology. And then in the gore, the gun in question locks us away and in perfect double speak dares to call it liberty. This is not freedom that the gun in question is defending, but the prison of violence within and without. The suffering from this collective cognitive malady and the perpetual feeding of these symptoms will always be the only service the gun in question can provide. I'm going to do something a little bit different tonight, following that rather uncharacteristic preamble to the nature of my generalized message. I have props. Brought things to show you. Evidence of work done and things made. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to present an essay called A California Cosmology in Literature. I think this would be appropriate to try this out, experiment with you all guinea pigs as you are, beautiful human selves, at one of our stalwart independent booksellers here, Green Apple. Gosh, what a defensive outfit this is, aren't they? Stewarding if what can be described as a literary horizon, as horrific as that might be, from Gutenberg towards perhaps even some horrible carbon-based end. I stand with you, and I think that although I will be talking about other books tonight, other than, you know, the coast of California, that project that has swallowed all of my heart, body, and spirit for the past several years, you will see the through line, the connections that I'm making. So please let yourself be unsettled, and I'm looking forward to your questions afterwards. Please ask me about anything. But here we go with this. So as I write this, I've just completed another leg in my ongoing residency at Stanford University, where I was invited to speak to two very different undergrad classes. One, a seminar course for biology students celebrating arboreal botany called A Partnership with Trees, led by Dr. Devaki Baya. And two, a multidisciplinary course for seniors majoring in science with artistic proclivities called The Senior Reflection, led by Andrew Todhunter and Susan McConnell. Aside from the deep honor of being asked to present my work to such an academically advanced community within the curriculum assembled by such a prestigious faculty, it was clear to me that this opportunity was singular in my unfolding career as yet. To exhibit my take on the history and application of ecological philosophy, the stuff that makes me, me, the impetus of all my efforts towards my subject, the biogeographic history of California as a metaphor for personal identity and holistic understanding, was a genuine pleasure to exercise. As I wound my way through ideas that included rhetorical and epistemological theories of consilience, the marriage of science and art, aesthetics, the transmission of meaning through media, and complexity, the functional description of emergent phenomena, I realized that I should have come prepared with a suggested reading list. I don't make ideas up, but synthesize and appropriate liberally. And I'm very sensitive to and determinedly understand the need to cite sources. What follows is that list. These 27 books form a bridge only made up of keystones. Without any single one of these books, the pile of stones that is me would never have formed the suspension necessary to get to where I've gotten so far on my mortal journey towards any semblance of self-actualization. So below is a peripheral tour of how these books work in quasi-tandem to describe a collective orientation, a trajectory toward context, and a historical framework of sources that fuel my path. It is woefully incomplete. I can hear a voice from the back criticizing all of my decisions of what made the cut, or more to the point, what didn't. Where are all the field guides? Where's Charles Post, John Muir Laws? Why is there only one included in this list? That'd be Kaufmann's Conifer Country. Where's all the fiction? Where's Kim Stanley Robinson? Where's Joan Didion? Where's Ursula Le Guin? Why is there only one novel on this list? Powers' Overstory. Where's all the poetry? Where's Percy Shelley? Where's Deborah Miranda? Where's Joy Harjo? Why is there only one book of poetry on this list? Snyder's Mountains and Rivers Without End. The answer to all these questions tends towards the arbitrary. If I had built this list on another day, it would have been populated with a different cohort of my literary loves. For now, I will let this stand as the concentrated network it was intended to represent. For now, well, it's a focused slice of the library, not an overwhelming flood of what I think is good in writing and expression. Each of these works has had a climatic effect on me, representing gale force winds and perennial storms that continue to shape the sculpted, irregular tree hanging precariously on the ocean cliff that I am. Okay, so most of these books are probably available right here in your friendly neighborhood independent bookstore. I don't know what order I'm going to pull them out of the bag. I put them in haphazardly. But the first one would be Richard Dawkins, The Selfish Gene. Where are you? Hold on. It gets easier as I find the rhythm. I wrestle with Dawkins every day, and yet the idea of the meme, an epigenetic phenomena, might be the best unit of sociobiology we have yet working that can begin to point to something like a unified theory of biology, mapping out the answer to the question of how genes move through to construct between us something like culture. The American West as Living Space by Wallace Stegner. There is no Western writer I trust more with the ability to construct a sentence than Stegner. His ability is so sublime that even only armed with syntax and diction, I suppose vocabulary, he is able to construct an inalienable template of California mythology that we are all helpless not to subscribe to. The West without water, what past floods, droughts, and other climatic clues tell us about tomorrow, by Ingram and Malmund-Rome. A little talked about classic that examines the paleoclimate of California, that puts today's drought emergencies in historical context, exposing truths about California's mutable character, its resiliencies, and its fragilities, allows for the accounting of our needed course correction about what is normal and what isn't in light of, among other things, climate breakdown by way of anthropogenic global warming. Ah, yes, René Descartes, Discourse on Method and Meditations on First Philosophy. By declaring cogito ergo sum, the father of modern philosophy myopically exiled all non-thinking beings to a conceptual realm of non-existence, paving the way for the Industrial Revolution vis-a-vis the licensing of all nature to be treated as object and therefore as commodity. Strength to Love by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The civil rights movement of the 60s represents a high water mark for cultural studies, for defining America, and for the story we tell ourselves about what it means to be human. Exploring our capacity for love and justice is integral to surviving the litany of bottleneck stresses the biosphere has already entered into, and we would do well to maintain a connection to the original vision presented here. Gary Snyder, Mountains and Rivers Without End. The firmament of my youth was written on a pollen grain expelled by Snyder's blooming verse. There are simply no writers I am more grateful for sharing a cosmologic moment in space-time with. I recognize in my heart every inch of the place he describes. Tending the Wild, Native American Knowledge and the Management of California's Natural Resources, M. Cat Anderson. It wasn't that indigenous culture somehow did not invent agriculture in their what is potentially a 30,000 year or longer history of residence in this biome. In fact, it was the conscious eschewing of the type of labor and the exhausting of resources that such a regime necessarily imposes. The sophisticated ethnobotany on display immediately challenges the assumptive supremacy of Western science. The reason for flowers, their history, culture, biology, and how they shaped our lives. The reason for flowers. The history of flowering plants, the angiosperms, is the history of coevolution with pollinators. The ecology at play transcends the mechanisms of botany and touches the undeniably aesthetic. The book is rightly entitled Reason and Not Meaning. Trees in Paradise, The Botanical Conquest of California by Jared Farmer. A history of California where humanity is displaced from the center. Take 4 tree species and describe the road to colonization and urbanization across the beleaguered floristic province. Foremost of history books that take a unique perspective to tell their story. The Peregrine by J.A. Baker. On my shelf next to Lopez's Arctic Dreams, Childs' is The Secret Language of Water, and Carson's The Edge of the Sea. This thin book sits among the greatest observational accounts of focused attention to the natural world. I'm opened by the affection on display, and I am stunned by the economically presented density of insightful wealth provided. Corridor Ecology, Linking Landscapes for Biodiversity, Conservation, and Climate Adaptation by Hilty Keeley, Lideker, and Marenlander. I need a lot of math to be won over. I require at least as much quantification as I do qualification when internalizing any piece of true knowledge. Math is best when it is simply presented as well-researched data that follows an abstract game of truth that it most certainly is. Here presented as such, the connective sinew, the habitat space that is required for ecological processes to function, given so much anthropogenic fragmentation, is the vanguard of conservation biology and will leave the premise of this book justified in the years, decades, and even centuries to come. All right, press on. The Living Mountain by Nan Shepherd. On my shelf, next to Ehrlich's The Solace of Open Spaces, and McFarlane's Underland, and Abbey's Desert Solitaire, this thin book sits among the greatest love letters ever written to a place by a careful watcher on the subtle and the sublime. The connections presented are so complete that I begin to doubt whether we are describing an external landscape or an internal investigation of the artists themselves. The Overstory by Richard Powers. I read novels from time to time, and I rarely finish them. I've read this book a number of times. This book broke me. I found myself once having convulsed in dry weeping at the narrative. The arrangement of the dynamic prose had me wondering if maybe my own genetic structure was susceptible to alteration by the power of its configuration. Surely I will never be the same. Conifer Country, a natural history and hiking guide to 35 conifers of Klamath Mountain region by Michael Kaufmann, no relation. Yes, Conifer Country in California, an epicenter of conifer biodiversity in all the world, cutting through the green wall that is pathological plant blindness, should be required for residency. Learn and know your pines, your cedars, your firs at all. These are your neighbors, and their biogeography has never been so well represented in detail as they are here. We Are the Land, A History of Native California by Atkins and Bauer. Finally, a history book that seems to get it. From the glacial shadows, even before the Holocene, the people of California interfaced with the landscape in a sophisticated manner that sustained a population that at the time of contact was probably close to 1 million people. The lessons to be learned transform even the most incalcitrant. Crowd favorite. Coast of California, I think, is sitting at number 5 right now, nonfiction. This is a 10-year-old book that is still at number 1, and I'm actually grateful for that. I'm hoping that I don't displace that. As a matter of fact, this is something that aspirational. Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom. Thank goodness. Is that a beer? Open up beer. Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. The history of the 21st century will recount the power of the voice presented in this book. This examination of reciprocity, this celebration of traditional ecological knowledge, this builder of disciplinary bridges is among maybe 5 books in all of human history that will be remembered for the way it changed the paradigms at work across American culture and beyond. I don't pull my punches. James Joyce, The Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. In 120 years, no other creative has since pinpointed the problems of aesthetic theory in a more concise manner than Joyce. It is my contention that getting this right is step 1 in the process of joining the ranks of those engaged in professional expression. California, A Fire Survey by Stephen J. Pine. No, his name is not a joke. Let's see here. Fire doesn't exist on the land and doesn't just exist on the land and in the air that it transforms, but in a historical, cultural, and mythological context. Getting right with fire is a key determinant that will gauge the quality of our continued residency in California into the future of the unfolding Anthropocene. And like Kaufmann, who you will see in a second, I could have included any of 3 books that he wrote for inclusion here. Deep Hanging Out, Wanderings and Wonderment in Native California by Malcolm Marglin. Marglin, again, he wrote The Ohlone Way, which I saw up like front and center. That was 74, 75, 76. Emmerich, you know the year on that? 78, thank you, brother. That's why I keep him close. Malcolm Marglin's The Ohlone Way, 1978. Malcolm Marglin, also the founder of Heyday Books, my publisher. Deep Hanging Out, this is his new one. Marglin, again, as he has spent the last 5 decades doing, presents a candid account of indigenous California that is as tender as it is unflinching. 500 years of genocide, displacement, enslavement, and an attempted erasure has presented contemporary society with the miracle of cultural resurgence among indigenous peoples. Marglin has listened and reports on it with unparalleled care and respect, and quite a bit of humor too. Consilience, The Unity of Knowledge by Edward O. Wilson. The metal that is me was forged on this anvil. The story that we tell ourselves about truth and meaning in relation to the quality of the subjects we study across the phenomenological universe will always be entangled by the discriminatory nature of the perceiving human mind. In order to bring together science and the humanities, you have to get the capacities and disabilities of both correct from the start. Here's that Kaufmann book I promised. The Song of the Dodo, Island Biogeography in the Age of Extinction by David Kaufmann. Getting conservation right means getting extinction right. Understanding the technicalities of why an entire species fades to non-existence should be left to only the very best researchers. I could have chosen 3 different books by Kaufmann for this list. Cadillac Desert, The American West and Its Disappearing Water by Mark Reisner. Can I get a what? Yeah. Among the most important pieces of journalistic writings from the 20th century, unflinching, brave, terrifying, and true to its core, this book stands witness to injustice, documents the missteps, and offers prescriptive course correction that renders us fools should we not heed the alarm bell ringing. Clanging was the word I used. I like that word better. Entangled Life, How Fungi Make Our Worlds, Change Our Minds, and Shape Our Futures by Merlin Sheldrake. A lot of these books are recent, and a lot of them are very, very old. The mycorrhizal substrate that supports all life on the planet represents a biological dark matter, analogous to the astrophysical dark matter that dominates the cosmos. The scale of this proposition challenges so many fundamentals that we hold about even taxonomic biology and demands all of our attention. The Klamath Knot, Explorations of Myth and Evolution by David Rains Wallace. This book is a gem. If Gary Snyder was able to channel the voice of a multidisciplined biologist and ethnographer into a cogent treatise on a particular piece of geography, the work would resemble something like this. The voice of the author is classic and approachable, but wholly new and full of revelation, uncolonized, immediate, and deftly reactive. What we have here is a literary map to a new vision of what has been, until now, an impenetrable landscape. Assembling California by John McPhee. The geologist is a very special kind of person. The quality of story, stratified, tangled, melted, and transformed by the abiotic processes of the earth across oceans of time that fade to incomprehensible vastness, is appreciable and investigable only by a selected chosen few. To have the opaque world pried open by a master whose craft is rooted in an eloquence that is only afforded to the most patient, is clearly our best, if not our only, inroad here. The Theory of Island Biogeography by Robert MacArthur and Edward Wilson, 1968. Straight up science book. In order to entertain the idea of the sixth mass extinction, you have to understand how species colonize areas, and couple that with a working theory of speciation. Darwin's book described the theory of natural selection by evolution, not necessarily what the book purports to do on the origin of species by means of natural selection, on the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. This is the first book to honor and fulfill that promise and hope, that promise and hope, written more than 100 years after Darwin. And then lastly, the last book to pull from the bag, Finding the Mother Tree, Discovering the Wisdom of the Forest by Susan Simard. Might be Suzanne Simard. As we wait for the new Darwin, one that might better describe what might be the mathematical function of cooperation within homeostatic ecosystems, we might turn to the research of Dr. Simard and her work over the past several decades. The forest, by her estimation, can be considered a single networked entity, alive, sentient, and consciousness. As alive, sentient, and consciousness as the empirical data suggests. Okay, so that's what I got. So that's sort of an introduction to my book. So now we talk about the coast of California, right? So this is how you support Green Apple, and this is also where I give you a peek behind the curtain, so to say. These are key ingredients to the machine that is my character vocation. Okay, give me something now. I know I didn't talk about anything, so so let's talk about something. Any of y'all read the book? Who has the book so far? Oh, my editor does. That's good. All right, excellent. You guys like it?
I like what I've come through so far.
Oh, very good. All right. Well, thank you for your support. Right on. It's the six books I got coming out. That, I mean, you can see the gift set of this Game of Thrones of California nature that I'm hacking away at page by page, inch by inch, in the dirt, bloodied knees and all. We're going to see how this unfolds, but I hope that not only am I describing a spatial context for the more than human world of California, but also exploring the temporal context from deep time, or is called sort of ubiquitously in indigenous culture, sacred time, to even conceptions of potential common ground where we might begin the dialogue, not just talking about maintaining this world till Tuesday, which is questionable if you read too much social media, but actually talking about what California will look like in 500 years, 5,000 years. Where's your 100-year business plan? I need to see it. Otherwise, if you're not thinking on that level, then how dare you use words like sustainable? And it might be that to get actually there, we have to unpack all of these other words like nature. Nature, a ubiquitous term that doesn't really exist in California. It never has, or at least not in the Holocene, not since humans arrived, when every inch now of California has been altered, interfaced with by this technology of fire, among other things. And so complete was the pyrogenic record across indigenous agricultural technologies that it's estimated that between 6 and 10 million acres a year were put to the torch. Of course, you have that kind of naturalized regime, a regime of fire that replaced a regime of incredible grazing. You have to remember, in the Pleistocene, California was subject to over 24 species of herbivore that weighed more than a ton. 4 different species of horses to the largest camel that has ever existed in the fossil record, to a few different species of mammoth. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's a lot of grazing. So when the fire comes through, plants in California evolved to just get knocked down And then in fire, you have this incredible fecundity that happens. You know, animals do their trampling and their fertilizing. But fire has a way of distributing phosphorus and nitrogen directly into the topsoil, making the land itself more fertile. When it's operated in these naturalized regimes, as I say, normal return indices, as opposed to what the incredible deformation that we have subjected these, we have subjected our arboreal communities to over the past 100 years. Certainly policies of suppression, timber policies, and concentrated, quite intentional policies of tribal violence or violence unto tribal people. Much in the way that the buffalo were wiped out in the Great Plains to destroy the food source of the indigenous community, so too was fire removed from the land intentionally by American powers that be. So that all being said, is a really sort of like strange ethical creek. What do you guys want to talk about? We want to talk about art. Anybody have any questions for me? Yes. Great question. I've managed to whittle this down now on my 5th book to basically 4 activities in any given day. And it is actually yoga has kind of become a 5th, but I don't really include that here. Reading, writing, hiking, painting. And they've all kind of become equivocal experiences, actually. It's almost as if, you know, like when I'm hiking, I can perceive the forest unfolding about me in a narrative context, chapters opening, where even like in painting, I paint from left to right, as just like the writing, you know, I'm all about calligraphy and handwriting, which leads back to painting, right? Just pushing fluid around on paper inside the picture plane, always establishing a composition. And then the reading, much like hiking, where it's like the miles of printed ink that my eyes traverse, searching for the abstract landscape. Somehow my own imaginative creation. So that you know, that would be the regime. And you know, I mean, in tandem with that, the question almost is like, well, how long do these books take? And generally, I put one out about every 18 months or so. Is that right, Emmerich? Something like that. So it's like it takes about a year. But when I say a year, I mean like it's like 7 days a week. I mean, if it was a job, it would be the hardest job ever. Thank God it's not a job. It's my life. The sun is up. Let's make hay. So tending to this thing, this California that I've got, right? I've got the best I got the best metaphor in the universe to play with, to interact with, to call my own. As I say in, I think, the 2nd paragraph of my new book, to make a place for California in my heart as it has been a home to me. And then that follows that the grand vision, of course, is always, how do I be more from this place? So that would be the reason why there's only one novel in here, I suppose. There should be more, as Emmerich points out all the time. Anyways, thank you for the question. I know. Any other questions? What we got? Yes, Car. Oh, I love it. What's up, internet? Mm. Right, right. Well, that is a wonder, right? Because it's defined by parameters that exist in our common language, really a lexicon of symbology that we share inside of this cultural moment. You know, I went to school in Santa Barbara, and I spent most of my time sort of skipping class and backpacking in the San Ynez Mountains. And there I was chasing and searching for Chumash rock art sites, hundreds of art sites across the Chumash Mountains. I mean, well, the San Ynez Mountains that were once the Chumash Mountains. And I mean, this nation was the painters. They were the painters. Might pull away a big blue California lilac bush, ceanothus plant, to see this like 20-foot long condor-like creature with, maybe it's an insect. Maybe is that a human leg or an insect wing, and what are all these other mandalas around here? Most of that particular narrative that explicitly denotes the metaphor being expressed has been lost to the ocean of history, maybe the 600 years since it was painted, before contact, before the building of the Santa Barbara mission. What I immediately recognized, regardless of its narrative specificity, was that here we have an artist who is communicating with their community truths about their relationship to the natural world. Like, oh, I could do that for my community. Like, I wonder if you take one of my wildlife renderings of an eagle face or whatever. I wonder if I could somehow show that to that Chumash artist, that painter who made that painting on the wall behind the ceanothus bush. If they could even understand the composition, the nature of the expression on the page, on a purely cognitive level, just as I am befuddled by what they are representing there. And that points to this aesthetic theory of how much work you're doing as the audience, looking at one of my paintings, figuring out in your mind what that represents, and deciding in an instant, based on this deep, rich lexicon, this cipher that we share, really, of particular clues unto the rendering that determines its success or not. So this is really like the nature of semiotics, right? How we transmit communication through symbology, and how that meaning fills us with a sense of ourselves and our connection between the maker and the audience, the community, the individual artist, to reveal something true about even like the natural world, or our place in the natural world. You see how powerful it quickly expands to become. And why, like, I don't put photographs in my book. That there is something that the handmade quality transmits that seems to be more of a meditation of my own existential predicament, even over the subject of the media itself. So that's the beginning of an answer to Alexis's question online. But I really appreciate the online question. All right. Anything else for me, guys? Yes.
The journey of crafting these books
Mhm.
over the years, how has it changed you?
In every way. It's marvelous. I mean, I spent the last bit of the 20th century and the first bits of the 21st century wrestling with the gallery world of New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles with big moody oil paintings, mostly figurative. And then getting back into my love of backpacking and getting back into the rich, very naturalistic palette that I found out there, away from my own crises. Giving it all back to this thing that I realized that I love more than any other aspect of the universe, which is the natural world of California. Engaging with that has been wholly transformative and liberating on so many levels as well. As I, but even now, as you might glean from my selection of books here, and hanging out with the good folks at Heyday Books that publish, among other things, the News from Native California and a number of titles like Malcolm Marglin's books or whatever on Indigenous California, and recognizing, as I described earlier, the integral and necessary connection between what was Indigenous culture and the character of what natural California is. For example, realizing just how to be quite candid, abysmally wrong John Muir got it. Not in his feelings and his affectations for beauty, and I understand that, but just in the applied policy that he prescribed towards the displacement of native peoples from the land in order to save the land. A regime of policies that to this day are affecting Indigenous people around the globe. People are suffering from that kind of thinking. Save the land from the people who have lived on the land since sacred time. So then, just by making maps and deliberating on what power I have to dictate then where you hold your attention in the picture, in the, the process of map making is an exercise in power, and checking my privilege every minute of the day is an ongoing preoccupation. And I'm bringing more and more voices from Indigenous California, say, into that process of representation, because the power that I'm wielding is the power of attention, the power of designating what actually is important to pay attention to. And getting that right is a very complicated thing that I don't take lightly at all. In fact, that's what takes most of my time to really, because the best maps are just like of one thing. So what is that one thing? Just keep drawing circles. So being at this moment of great transformation, that is the 21st century, where we actually have this horizon of hope before us, where I could really see a grand matrix of possibilities that describe a future, an immediate future for us, say at the end of the 21st century, where we leave California's natural world in better shape than we left it at the end of the 20th century, despite even the perturbations of climate breakdown by way of anthropogenic global warming. all the pieces are still on the board and are revivifying right now. So while I am not an optimist and I'm not a pessimist, I believe that that's a very anemic end of the ethical argument to dwell upon, and in fact, another way of injecting a bit of divisive rhetoric somehow. I am a prisoner of hope. I'm very much on the side of prosperity for all. That's why the end of my book, chapter 10, is there's a big chapter on justice there. Why is there so much talk on justice in a book about nature? Because, I mean, to borrow a phrase from the civil rights movement, lift all voices. Because we can't do that without attending to this. And yet, there is a clear path forward. That was a bit of a long-winded question, but it was a deep, it was a long-winded answer to a deep question. Thank you for that. I know. All right, anybody else? Yes.
You talked about how California's been in a constant state of flux. And how it's been lately. I'm just wondering how,
Yes.
in writing books about it,
Yeah.
how do you choose what to capture? What is kind of California? Are you trying to capture it in a moment in time? Are you trying to draw a sense of it out from all of its history or potential future?
Right.
You
Well,
just find the books and find out.
yeah, right. Well, no, yeah, ultimately, yes, of course. But if I can distill it into a little soundbite here, we've got different frames of reference, and we've got different possibilities going into the future, right, across this complex system. A complex system is different than a complicated system. Like your watch is a complicated system. That's not a complex system. The theory of complexity dictates that from this dancing terrain of many different variables, emergent phenomena will occur. I guess one of the most famous, of course, is in the context of human consciousness itself. Given sufficient complexity across evolutionary scales of time, phenomena like consciousness might be inevitable to occur. Right now, my estimation, we've got two possibilities going forward, right? Which is either catastrophic failure on a biospheric level, or maybe catastrophic success. Each are co-equal. I am not an apocalyptic environmentalist. In fact, I think that's bad for the movement. I think it's bad for ourselves. I think whatever happens, we're going to need to be centered and unpanicked. And as I'm straying a bit from the question, but I think that it's all related to being more to this place, getting in touch with these natural systems. I mean, it's very likely that the Anthropocene might be remembered geologically as, forgive my crassness, but a fart of carbon into the atmosphere. It may be that this interglacial period that we have encountered and enjoyed over the past 14,000 years. The last one was like 117,000 to 100,000 years ago, it was still the late Pleistocene. The Anthropocene, even the Holocene, might be just an extension of the Pleistocene. There are big forces at work. Now, I'm not saying that we don't have a lot of work to do right now. I am not saying that the bottleneck is closing on from so many vectors, given our current situation. I am saying that by studying what came before, we can anticipate what comes next. So that's your temporal question. And specifically, if I were to lay that template down then on the books, I would say the forests represents the past, right? How these systems came to evolved together over the past, well, beginning about 6 million years ago in the mid-Miocene, when California began to resemble its current tectonic configuration, leading up through the Holocene, really only about the past 5,000 years since sea level has stabilized to such a degree that San Francisco Bay was formed, for example. 5,000 years ago or so, when we begin to see the 435 shell mounds being created by a mature and realized community of about 50 tribelets that are today the Ohlone people. And we see normalized stewardship regimes, mutualistic regimes applied across hydrology and fire cycles within and across the mixed conifer woodland of the Western Sierra Nevada, say. So we've got ecosystems in California that are really about that old, which is a good enough slice of time to really do some investigation about how we can reset, given the amount of deformation that we have inflicted on these regimes. And by doing so, we move then to where we are right now, which would be the second book, The Coasts of California. The first line of the book is that this is a time capsule. The coasts of California are very different than what they once were, different from what they will be. This is a snapshot of right now. And now I'm involved in the deserts of California, which very well might be an investigation into the future quality of California's ecosystems, given rising aridity because of climate breakdown and decreasing intervals between drought events, say. So how is that going to change the land? The answer is probably very similarly to how it's done before, in perpetuity across this timescale. So that's the beginning of an answer, I suppose. All right, excellent. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
You kind of alluded to this in a few of your answers, but I think that you do have, I like that you do your prisoner of hope. You do like exude like basically a hope and a belief that like people and nature can coexist. I mean, now into the future, even if it's still a question in a certain sense. But I'm interested to know, what do you think the move for activating people into understanding what is happening with nature and to be in like a relationship with that is, and basically the question there is, what's the program?
What's the program? What's going on, man? Well, there's a couple of answers. I think that there are pressures from without and pressures from within. I am here to tell a story. I'm not here to make a better argument. I have no interest. It's funny, I've taken to camping now a few times with Wade Crowfoot, who's our Natural Resources Secretary, employs 9,000 people. So governor appointed position, he has one boss, and that's Newsom itself. Wade is a really down-to-earth guy from Michigan. He's a big fan of my work, and he called me up one day and wanted to go camping. I'm like, hell yeah. And we've done that a few times now because we enjoy sipping IPAs around campfires together, talking about this kind of thing. So what's the program? Well, I have very serious criticisms about the agency of an entity itself that is Sacramento, the entirety. I'm not talking about Wade's agency. I'm talking about volition. I'm talking about its ability to tend to the land as it demands, with specific regard to how humanity and nature are not two things, not one thing either. It's very difficult to keep two thoughts in your head at the same time. Since 1990, something wonderful has happened across the California landscape and indeed across the West, which is the land trust movement. The land trust movement just 30 years ago was 6 organizations. Now it's over 400 with over 3.5 million acres managed with targeted management under their charge. This is cellular grassroots community. I've talked to land trusts from the Oregon border to the Mojave Desert to Los Angeles to right here in the Bay Area. And what happens there is something that transcends, it's magical, transcends this divisive rhetoric that we are sold day in and day out. This corporate agenda of keeping us divided from one another, however you want to call it, north, south, urban, rural. Probably the big one's red, blue, right? Like all that kind of like this is just people wanting to like really sort of take care of this one grove of redwoods, say, or one grove of trees, one little watershed. Everyone in California wants a good environment. So something organically has happened there that's grassroots, that's cellular, that's outside of some sort of Washington-based NGO. That's really exciting to watch. And also what is happening is these economic market forces are being brought to bear with what might be called, a new industrial revolution that is happening right now across different realms of technology, logistics, and energy production. So it might be that with regard to what the program is, the ball is already rolling towards the next thing. We might be not as stuck as we think we are. There are solutions, and it's my hope that we maintain them democratically. I'm a big believer in democracy. I know that's a tough sell. But what I'm here to do is to supply a little bit of geographic literacy into the equation. And of course, the secret is that I'm doing it just for me. I got to figure these things out for myself. And you're all invited to come along. That's why I'm not making textbooks, right? This is my journey, woefully subjective. But that's why I'm an artist. I'm not a research scientist or policymaker. This is a work of creative exploration and imagination, where my role as an artist is almost more akin to that of like a journalist, right? To reveal the meaning. And in 500 pages, I get some breadth to actually like explore some philosophy in there too, ecological philosophy. That science can't really touch, sort of outside of that domain. I mean, there are good science writers who sort of go there, but they never quite get the aesthetic, the personal, the political truths quite right in my estimation, because they're tied to the idea of discovering things as scientists do. All right, so that might be a beginning of an answer there too. Thank you so much for the question. How are we doing? You're fidgeting. Are we timed? It's time. It's time everybody go home. Have a beer. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me sign your book.
Keep it going for Obi Kaufmann.
Oh, right on. Thank you. Thank you.